Welcome to this Speak Unique webinar. We're very, very pleased to have Linda Tomarelli here to take us through Speak Unique's offering. My personal experience of Speak Unique is I recorded my voice for them years ago in Edinburgh, and then about 18 months ago or so I got it back, which was quite nice, and I managed to fool my mum by playing it down the phone to her as a test, and she was fooled. So I'm really impressed with the work they do, and Linda will introduce that later. Before we get started though, I'm just going to take this opportunity to make sure you know about the next couple of courses coming up from Techability. In January, there's a course, Technology and Leadership, aimed at college leaders who are looking to make sure everything is in place to support technology use. And we always say that if you can't get your assistive technology sorted unless the underlying technology is in place. So this is a session led by an ex-college leader who's going to give people what they need to get all that sorted. So if you work in a college, please point your leadership teams towards that on 12th of January. And on the 2nd of February, we've run our course again, 10 practical steps to include more learners, top tips. Again, if you're an assistive technologist, you might know a lot of those, but this is a really good course to point tutors and learning support to who need just quick ways to include more learners in their sessions. So that little blurb over, I'll make sure you've got contact details at the end. Well, let's do it now, and then we can make sure if the questions go on at the end, that then we can give maximum time for that. So if you need contact details, hopefully you've got them because you've got here, but if not, our website's techability.org.uk, and you can email us on techability@natspec.org.uk. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Linda, give you the maximum time. So if you want to do your screen share, Linda, I'll stop mine.
Thanks, I will do.
Just to let everyone know, there will be time for questions at the end, but if you'll think of questions as you go along, please put them into the chat, but I'll probably save them to the end rather than interrupt Linda as she goes along. But please, as they occur to you, put them in the chat and I'll make sure I keep an eye on that. Okay, thanks very much, Linda. Over to you.
Okay, so am I okay to start?
Yep, fire away.
Okay, lovely. I've already been introduced, but my name's Linda. I'm a speech and language therapist and I work for Speak Unique. Thank you very much for allowing me to chat to you today. So I'm going to briefly introduce you to voice banking and Speak Unique, along with an overview of our service options and what the voice banking process is like. I'm going to tell you a little bit about using the voices, and then I hope that we'll have lots of time for questions at the end. So voice banking, just to give you a definition, is the process of recording your voice and then using this recording to create a personalized synthetic voice. And the synthetic voice can then be used on a device where it converts text to speech, allows the individual to communicate through a synthetic voice that sounds like their own. Traditionally, voice banking methods have excluded people who have impaired speech or who have no natural speech, but we know that those people also use synthetic voices or communicate through AAC or through a device. We developed our service with the traditional method in mind, so people who want to create a synthetic replica of their voice, but also with those in mind who have impaired speech, and also for those who communicate through a device but want to have a bespoke voice and they want to design how they sound, say for example, so that they fit in accent wise with their friends and family, or that it's age appropriate to them. Communication aids, while they're incredibly valuable, have been limited in their voice offering, so it's often a very generic voice that's loaded onto the communication aid. The idea for what we offer, so particularly paying attention to people whose speech is impaired or that they don't have natural speech, came from this gentleman who I'm about to show you. His name's Ewan MacDonald. and he's one of our founding members. He was diagnosed with MND at age 29. And when he started to lose his speech, thought there must be a way where I can continue to communicate in whatever form, but still sound like myself and retain my own identity. It was particularly important for him, having young children, that the voice he used sounded like him. So I'm going to play you an example of his speech and then his personalized synthetic voice.
I'm Ewan McDonald. I'm from Edinburgh. I'm Ewan McDonald. I'm from Edinburgh. I'm an ex-student at Edinburgh University, where I studied law. I'm an ex-student at Edinburgh University, where I studied law.
So as I hope you can hear, in the 2008 clip, his speech is what we call dysarthric. So it's slightly impaired, a bit slow and a bit slurred. And we smoothed that out in his synthetic voice. So it retains his lovely Edinburgh accent and sounds like him, but doesn't have those speech symptoms present. So as Phil mentioned, he got his voice back, I think 18 months ago. We launched in June 2020. And through our website, people can record their voice or upload old files and receive a personalized synthetic voice. So our mission statement is to deliver world-leading synthetic voice technology to people who have lost or will lose their voice due to medical conditions. And we realize that there's an unmet need to provide personalized synthetic voices simply and quickly, but also to be inclusive of those with impaired or unintelligible speech. So I'm going to quickly go through the different voice services that we offer. So the first is Voice Build. This is for people who have a medical diagnosis, but their speech is not yet affected. So for example, someone finds out that they need a laryngectomy, or someone with limb onset MND. They record through our website between 150 and 300 sentences. The voice that's created is then, they get one version back and it's a synthetic replica. So it should sound exactly like them, but a synthetic version. And it captures their accent and is age appropriate because it's based on their own voice. So that's our first service. Then we offer a voice repair. So this is for people who, like you and who I just played you, already have some difficulties or some symptoms in their speech. So this is very commonly people with conditions like bulbar onset MND or MSA, PSP, CBD. I'm saying a lot of letters here, but it's typically people with a neurodegenerative disease, where sometimes the first symptoms are changes to their speech. So they may have slowness or slurring. We record them in the same way. So they go onto the website through a laptop, headset microphone, between 150 and 300 sentences. They are then given back 5 different versions of the voice. So different speeds, different pitches, and it's for us to try and capture their voice before they had any symptoms as much as we can. They then get to select which voice sounds most like them. But we can also act on feedback. So quite often somebody will say the speed possibly isn't right, or the pitch needs to be higher or lower. We can alter things like that so that we work with them to get it sounding as close to their pre-morbid voice as we can possibly get. And then we have our voice design service. So I'm going to go into this one in a little bit more detail because I think it's possibly most relevant for you guys. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to play some clips, and I've got some videos to show you as well. So our voice design service is for people who don't have any intelligible speech. So for example, we've created quite a few voices for people who have cerebral palsy, and they communicate, they're very proficient at communicating with a device, but they use a generic voice, and they say, one example that I'm going to show you is someone from Yorkshire. He really wanted to have that accent to fit in with his family and friends. And there's a number of different ways that we can create a voice design. And I'll explain a little bit more about those in a minute. First of all, I'm just going to play you an example of someone's speech and then their synthetic voice.
Yeah, it was a good start. Obviously, we had a couple of league games before that. You know, we tasted a defeat that week, which was disappointing. But at the same time, we've had a bit of silverware.
So this was a really interesting voice design case for us. It's a rugby player who's done quite a lot to raise awareness of MND and what it's like to communicate through a communication aid. His name is Rob Burrow. And we actually, I'm allowed to share his name because he's been on the news an awful lot, raising awareness. We actually used pitch side interviews that, so when he played rugby and was interviewed after the game, because when he discovered our service, his speech was too impaired for us to repair. It was borderline unintelligible. So we were able to use these old recordings and capture, and he has a lovely strong accent, and we were able to capture that in the synthetic voice. So this is what his synthetic voice sounds like.
Here is a sample of my personalised speak unique voice.
So he naturally has quite rapid speech and a good strong accent, and we were able to recreate that in the synthetic voice.
I'm Helen, a retired secretary from Glasgow.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting that to play. So this is another really interesting case for us, and I think it's good to explain all the different methods that we have for a voice design. So this lady came to us, again, her speech was too impaired for us to create a voice from. And we asked, is there anything, do you have any old voice recordings of yourself? And initially she said no. And then remembered that she'd appeared on a TV show called Tipping Point. So obviously the TV show had captured a lot of her natural speech. So we then had to chase down the production company and the producers, ask for the footage of her speaking, and then ask for it to be cleaned of all the sort of game show background noises, all the beeps and songs and applause and things like that. And we were able to take that raw recording and use that to create a personalized synthetic voice. So Helen was featured on the news. Again, she did a lot to raise awareness, and I'm just going to play you a little clip of her.
I'm Helen, a retired secretary from Glasgow.
Good luck to you all. Let's play Tipping Points. So in round one, you each start with 3 counters. Questions are on the buzzer.
The money event, please.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Well done, Helen. £2,750.
Yeah, it's nice to come home.
The diagnosis was devastating for the whole family. I wanted people to know what I was saying, and I did not want to sound like a machine. I am extremely grateful to everyone concerned for giving me back my voice.
So I hope you managed to hear what her natural speech was like, and then hear her accent and her tone of voice coming through in the personalized voice that we created for her. So those 2 examples of voice design so far are a specific method for how we create a voice design, and that's using old recordings. So through our website, it's a slightly different journey from a voice build and a voice repair because there's no recording involved. Instead, they can go to our website and upload their old recordings. There's instructions on our website for people to follow, and it doesn't necessarily have to be someone, you know, doing an interview or speaking a lot. We can use shorter individual clips to make up the bulk of how much footage that we need, which tends to be around 5 to 8 minutes. So it's not a lot of speech that we need to work with. Ideally, it's free of background noise, so it's not, you know, out on a windy walk, or it doesn't have music or the news on in the background. There's a lot we can do to clean audio to remove background noises, but it's definitely a really popular method for people to be able to create a synthetic voice, because a lot of people these days have footage of themselves. So I'm now going to show you another example of a voice design. And in this method, we nominate voice donors. So we can create a voice design from old recordings. But if that's not possible, we can also ask the person to select voice donors. So if they want a particular accent, they can ask their family or friends. Sometimes family members can sound very similar, and it's a really good way for us to capture a regional accent. So in the case that I'm about to tell you about, this young man got in touch with us. He has cerebral palsy. He didn't like his generic synthetic voice. I think it had an American accent. You'll hear it in a minute, but he is a Yorkshireman and very much wanted to sound like his friends and family. And what he actually did was auditioned people to be his voice donors. People can nominate, they can ask friends. This young man asked for people on Twitter and ended up getting quite a few volunteers. We actually only need 1 or 2, and we then blend these voices together, or we blend it with people that we already have in our voice bank. So it doesn't sound like the donor. It's a completely new bespoke voice. So this is a very collaborative process with the person, because ultimately they're designing what they want to sound like. But it can also be quite a fun process. Richie, who you'll see in a second, was very sure of what he wanted accent-wise, and he also felt that he would have a nice deep voice if he had a natural voice. So that's what we tried to create for him, and I'll show you a little clip now.
I dislike my voice because it sounds like I am American.
I wanted to sound different from the other people who use the talker, but I also wanted to sound like my family and friends from Yorkshire.
So what does it mean now to have a genuine Yorkshire accent?
I was very emotional. There were lots of tears of joy, of course, though. I was incredibly happy with it and loved saying random things to see how they sounded with my new voice instead of an American robot voice.
Help.
So that's him pictured at the end with his speech and language therapist, who we liaise with a lot, and who works with him so that we got a voice design that he really likes and really identifies with. So he has the accent that's important to him. So I would very much encourage everyone to go to our website if possible. You can sign up and record, and we also have a lot of resources. So in our support document area, we have an introduction to Speak Unique, which is a sort of overview of everything that we offer, and a step-by-step guide. We also then have further detailed step-by-step guides for each individual service: voice build, voice repair, and voice design. We have an area called Using Your Voice, where we have an app guide. So there's lots and lots of information and support on the website. And also, I would like to tell you that, as Phil was able to do, we offer a free trial of Voice Build for healthcare professionals. We would potentially be able to offer a voice design, but there's a different process involved in each different service. If you're wanting to test how similar we can get a voice to sound to you, then I'd encourage you to go and sign up as a healthcare professional. It's also a really good way for then you to demo the voice. You can see what our app is like, and how to download the voice. So it can be a useful thing to do. If you've got any questions about getting started and signing up, please feel free to get in touch with us. So this is what the recording screen looks like. We ask for a minimum of 150 sentences and a maximum of 300. We have built voices on less than 150. This is sort of a middle ground. Some people like to do 300 because they enjoy the process. It very much depends on what their speech is like. If their speech isn't impaired, sometimes they want to do it all in one go. If their speech is impaired and they have some symptoms or some difficulties, they can do it in small chunks. So they can use the save and log out button. They can do as many sentences as they can manage in one go, click save and log out, and come back and do more at a suitable time so they're able to rest in between. As I mentioned, you will need to record on a laptop with ideally a headset microphone. That just gives slightly better quality recordings when the microphone is worn, because it stops it moving around. But we've got lots of tips and tricks and detailed instructions in different formats on our website. So there's a video to watch on how to record. There's step-by-step instructions that you can read, all about how to create a good quality recording. In the case of a voice repair and in a voice design, the user will get multiple versions of the voice. This is because with a voice build, if there are no symptoms, it's just a synthetic replica. But with a voice repair or a voice design, it's a much more collaborative approach to creating the voice, because we either don't know what the person sounded like before they had symptoms, or they haven't had natural speech, so we don't know what they would have sounded like. So we try and tailor it so that they have different choices. They can decide which one they prefer. They can also give feedback on, as I mentioned before, things like speed or pitch, so that we can alter certain aspects. But it's just to say it looks slightly different for a voice build than it does to a voice repair or a voice design, because we create multiple versions in those instances. So payment and funding, we are often asked when payment and funding or a funding request will be taken. It's the last step after listening to the synthetic voice samples. We like people to listen to their voice and be happy with it, and we'll act on feedback before we take payment, because we want to make sure that the voice that people are downloading and going to use, they're going to be happy with it. It's a one-off cost for the voice. We have funding arrangement in places with a few different charities, and we're always happy to approach different charities on behalf of patients, or to work with patients if payment or funding was an obstacle. If you have any questions about funding, it's always worth getting in touch with us, and there are various things that we can do. So using the voices, we have our own Speak Unique app. The app is available for free on the App Store or the Google Play Store. It's text-to-speech app. It's only accessible with our voices. So to use the Speak Unique app, you have to have a Speak Unique voice. To use a Speak Unique voice, you need to have the app. But there's no cap on downloads, so it can be used, someone can use it on a phone and a tablet and a Windows version. If they're going to use it on Windows, it's through compatible third-party software, which I'll go into in a little minute. But we're also compatible with alternative access, such as Switch Access. So we're compatible with Windows-based communication aids, including Tobii, Grid, and Liberator devices. And again, there's no limit on how often people can download their voice. So just to summarize, our technology allows people to retain their identity when using a synthetic voice. We can create voices from short recordings, even with impaired speech, and we also offer voice banking opportunities for people with unintelligible speech. Our website is user-friendly and accessible to everyone. People listen to the voice and we make sure they're happy with it before we ask for any payment or funding. And we crucially offer a free voice banking trial to all of you, any healthcare professionals that are interested, and please feel free to pass that on to colleagues who aren't attending today but might be interested in doing it. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully hear some questions.
Great, thanks for that, Linda. It's really interesting. I think those demo voices and the kind of before and after things are really powerful for people to hear. I'll get to the first question from Neil, who's asking, can you work with languages other than English, e.g. Welsh or Arabic?
That's a very good question. We're trying is the answer. So we recently had a gentleman from Iceland who actually put us in contact with a university in Iceland, and there's been lots of collaboration over how we make this accessible in other languages. We've heard from a lot of speech and language therapists that Welsh would be really valuable. It is one of our top priorities for early in the new year to make what we do accessible in other languages. essentially the code is there, we have the capability, but what we need to do is create an inventory of all the sounds that make up the different language, as well as have an understanding of what the prosody or intonation is like in the other languages. So it's a work in progress, and hopefully it won't be too long before, yes, we're able to offer other languages.
Okay, that sounds very promising. Thanks. So if any of you got any questions, there's confusingly a chat box and a question and answer box. I have them both open, so if you want to put them into either. If you can't type for any reason and you want to ask your question verbally, just use the raise hand on Zoom, and I will hand the mic over to you and you could ask your question of Linda verbally. While you might be typing any questions in, I've got a couple which hopefully won't preempt anyone else's. I noticed, Linda, that you didn't mention the A word, the Apple word, and iOS, and putting voices onto iOS. Now, I know you've got your app and you talked about that. Is there a particular blockage with getting voices onto iOS apps?
So our app is available on Apple products. I don't know if that's what you mean, or if you mean adding it to the actual voice menu, the accessibility.
Yeah, adding it. If people are using AAC apps on an iPad, for instance, are they able to get a Speak Unique voice into that app?
It depends on the app is the answer. We are in talks with different companies to try and make our voices accessible within different apps. However, currently the voices on phones or tablets, whether it's Apple or Android, are only available through using the Speak Unique app.
Right, and it should be pointed out that that's not your fault. It's but the way, well, in my experience anyway, it's the way the platform works, that you have to download the voice with the app, or to you can't. It's not like Windows where you can have a range of voices and then punt them into whichever app you want.
Sadly not.
Okay, so it's good to know that you're working on that.
Do you have an app that you tend to work with the most, just out of interest?
Well, it'd be good if people can fire into the chat what apps they're using. I know there's a version of Grid for iPad, which gets used a lot in specialist.
So we will be compatible with Grid for iPad.
Okay. Proloquo to Go is another.
Proloquo to Go, no. Not yet. Not yet. Anyway.
Okay. Let's use the word.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think obviously that's probably developing, and it might be that if you can get one of those app companies on board, then
so we are working with
the others might follow suit. Yeah.
And Grid compatibility. As far as I know, we're compatible with Grid on iPads.
Okay. Well, hopefully that will be a snowball effect, and the other app people will take note and work with you. So Steve's asking, I presume voice donors have to give permission for their voice to be used. I couldn't, for instance, record someone speaking and submit their voice to your service.
No, it doesn't quite work that way. We would have the AAC user sign up as a voice design, and they then invite their donors through an email, which gives them a code which allows us to match the recordings with the donors, and it's sort of a unique link so that they're connected and kept track of. And no, we wouldn't ask someone to record another person without their permission. It's all done through the website.
No, that's good, because the example he's using is someone with sight loss wanting to substitute Matthew McConaughey's voice to use on their screen reader. So Steve, I think Matthew might have a few issues with that if he ever gets
I mean, we could tweet him and ask him. He might say yes. We do actually sometimes get asked for famous people's voices, but obviously we have to take consent and GDPR very seriously, so we can't create a voice that sounds based on an individual's speech without their permission.
Of course, this isn't, it's not like a sat nav where okay, so if you're interested, in the chat, Matthew is posting some voice banking for Welsh and Arabic that's currently in operation. So if people want to look at those, that might be useful if you need to get going with that right now. Linda, the other question I have, well, I've got lots, but is, to me, my voice sounds different in my head than it does on recordings. And do you ever get people coming back and saying, actually, that doesn't sound like me?
Yeah, we do quite often. But that's sort of why we create more than, especially with a repair and a design, why we create more than one version. It's to allow them to have a little bit of control over which they choose, basically, and to allow for the difference in how they hear themselves. But we also find that people will quite often play those different versions to family members. And what often happens is it can be very different. Some people will hear their voice and sort of cringe, because you know what it's like when you hear your voice play back, so you don't always like it. And that's a good way for us to tell, you hear yourself in that, because that you've reacted in a certain way. But also family member, someone might say, oh, I don't really hear myself in that, and the family members will say, that sounds very like you. And it's quite important, I think, to get the family's perspective, especially because they'll be the ones that listen to the synthetic voice quite often. So we've had good feedback on giving different versions of the voices, and it allows them to play it to friends and family members and get different perspectives on the voices.
Okay.
We can also ask them feedback, I should say, and we do, as long as it's concrete. If someone says, I don't like the voice, what do we do with that? But if someone says that voice is too high, we say, brilliant, we'll lower the pitch, no problem. Or if they say that's too fast, the speed can actually be controlled within the app. So we're always happy to work with people to get something that they want.
Great, that's really. And people are probably going to want to kick me virtually for asking this question, but why is it so? I think it's really cheap, £300 for, especially for a voice build, and the amount. I mean, I know not everybody's voice will need the amount of work that you've been describing in some of those individual cases, but to me, for a bespoke voice, especially if someone who's never had a voice and you're building from two others, sounds like a lot of work. And
it is more
£300
yeah.
doesn't sound much to me.
So the different price points are because there's different levels of work, or I call it collaboration, because we do try and work with the individual as much as we can. But basically, we want this service to be as accessible as possible. We don't want someone to not be able to access it because they can't afford it, which is why we think we've offered something at a very reasonable price, but we're also very willing to approach charities for funding or to work out payment plans with people if necessary. We very strongly believe this is something that people should be able to have access to if they need it. And as I mentioned before, our founding member is a man who lives with MND. We've got a very strong core team of healthcare workers who sort of understand that it has to be at a price point where people can afford it.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, I'm not complaining, because I would have expected it to be more. But I do realise that actually £300 for someone still could be very expensive. But considering, and Matthew's agreeing, considering the work that's put in. Okay, does anyone have any more questions? Now's your chance to grab Linda while she's here. Just fire them into the chat or raise your hand. If not, we'll start to bring this to a close, and I would just like to say thanks very much to Linda. It's really interesting to hear that firsthand, and I've been telling people about Speak Unique for quite a while, but it's great to hear it from you. So you left your, hopefully everyone's got your, could you just fire your email address into the chat again, or the generic Speak Unique email address, just so people have got that as a contact?
I will. I'll put
or they can just use the Google resource to find Speak Unique and get in touch. So anything more, obviously, fire that off to info@speakunique.co.uk.
And there's support at speakunique.co.uk as well.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Right. So thanks very much, Linda. Really appreciate it. Glad we didn't have
Thank
another
you for
fire
having me.
alarm in the middle of it. And hopefully people will be getting in touch with you to find out more.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Thanks very
Okay.
much.
Right. Thanks everyone for attending. The recording will be up in a couple of days if you want to view it again or refer anyone on. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.